First Alert Weather Extra with Atlanta's most accurate weather team starts now.
Thank you for joining us on this special edition of First Alert Weather Extra. I'm First Alert Chief Meteorologist Jennifer Valdez. We are going to be talking about all things winter weather ahead of this year's winter season. This year, we are expecting a La Nina winter, but what exactly does that mean? First Alert Meteorologist J.D. Disharoon explains.
As we take a look at the winter forecast for this year, you're going to hear a lot about La Nina, which is the cycle that we're in with the El Nino Southern Oscillation. We call it ENSO. So what it means is, well, basically out in the Pacific, we have the warmer waters, and typically trade winds are going to carry those warm waters from the west to the east over towards Asia. Well, they typically move at a speed where the warm water is then again replaced with more warm water. So everything kind of stays a little bit on the, guess what, warmer side of things. But when the trade winds get extremely strong, it pushes that warmer water faster than it can actually be replaced. So what happens is upwelling occurs. That means the colder waters of the deeper sea start to make their way to the surface, and temperatures get much, much cooler along the equatorial Pacific. Now, you may have heard us talk about upwelling before. In fact, we talked about it earlier this summer when we had Hurricane Melissa just sitting off the coast of Jamaica. It took those warm waters that were off the coast, and eventually, it took a while, the cooler water beneath it started to come up to the surface. Well, it's the same kind of practice here. It's just on a much larger scale, and it has global ramifications for what happens. Now, obviously, we're interested in what happens in the winter. Overall, typically, that's the key here. Typically, it's not like this all the time, but typically we'd see cooler weather to the north, wetter weather to the east, and then up into the Midwest. The rest of us relatively warm and dry. And when we take a look at overall the La Ninas in the winter time, now this is for the entire winter. Typically, what we're going to see is up into the northern tier, things are much, much cooler. And then for the eastern and then southwest, things are typically warmer. Notice the areas that it's much warmer right here from the Gulf Coast all the way up into the mid-Atlantic states. But it's also a little bit drier as well. Now, not as dramatic on this map. You notice most of us actually average during La Nina, but the southeast, a little bit drier, and the Pacific Northwest, a little bit drier as well. So far we have warmer and drier, which for those of you who love snow, La Nina not usually what you're hoping for to get some of that snowfall in here. However, this is all averaged out over the entire winter, which meteorologically wise, December, January, and February. First Alert meteorologist Ella Dorsey is going to take a look at what happens when you break it down month by month. And it shows you that it's not always warm, and we will definitely see some cooler periods.
So this year we're expecting to go into that weak La Nina pattern. In order to find out what has gone on in the past when we've been in weak La Ninas in the winter, I looked at the last several years. I went back actually 5 decades. But the 3 years that stood out to me as being the closest to the weak La Nina we are in this year was 2005, 2008, and 2017. So I took these 3 years. I then look at what happened in December, January, and February of those years in order to predict what might happen this winter. This is what I found. In December, it was very cold for the eastern half of the country, including us right here in Georgia. A lot of times the coldest weather compared to average was in the Great Lakes, but some of that cold reached down in Georgia. Meanwhile, the Southwest was warmer than average. So if this were to play out, we could see a transition very quickly after a very warm Thanksgiving that we've had to a much colder December, okay? Then something pretty significant happens in January of those years. We see a thaw. Okay, that warm air takes back over. The western half of the country sees a midwinter thaw. The only slightly cooler than average area is the southeast coastline and Florida, but most of the South is average in January, which would mean it would still be cold, but possibly not extremely cold. Then in February, check this out. That warm air, it moves east. The northeast, the south, way warmer than average in February. Meanwhile, the high plains, the Pacific Northwest was colder than average in February of those years. So to round it out, okay, if we are to see the same thing that happened in those winters, here's kind of an idea. We could see a pretty cold mid-December to possibly mid-January, okay? We could then see ourselves come out of winter pretty quickly, get an early start to spring, because remember, it was much warmer than average in the south in February, so spring could arrive early. And then also, in each of those years, there was almost every year a decent snowfall event. I actually looked at 10 weak La Nina winters, and in 75% of those years, there was at least one snowfall of 2 inches or more, and most of the time that snowfall occurred in January. But I will say in 2017, if you guys remember, we had a major snowfall in December. So we could get a cold start to winter, come out of winter quickly, and possibly a good snowfall event. And speaking of snowfall, we had a couple of those good snowfall events last year. Meteorologist Patrick Peet is here to talk more about that.
So the winter of 2025 was a doozy, especially as far as wintry precip. Check it out. In mid-January, we had a cold air mass blanketing not only our area, but a large chunk of the eastern United States. And then we saw this area of low pressure develop along the Gulf Coast. And as it started to move east, it brought moisture our way. You interact moisture and cold air, especially sub-freezing temperatures, you get wintry precip. In North Georgia, first saw this as snow early that morning, but we started to see a bit of a warm nose or warm air moving into the mid-levels of the atmosphere, and that caused a change over to freezing rain, or what we all call ice, by the afternoon. By the time it ended, most of the area had picked up a couple of inches of snow and a thin layer of ice. Let's talk about the snow first. You can see the epicenter of snowfall, unfortunately, across some of our more populated counties. I'm looking at Henry County, Clayton County, DeKalb, Fulton, Cobb, Douglas, Paulding counties. We saw widespread snow totals of roughly 2 to 4 inches. And then there were areas roughly north of that picked up 1 to 3 inches, especially you go into the higher elevations of the North Georgia mountains. It's the first snow event that I've experienced since I've been here, and I've been here for nearly 3 years. Now, on top of that, we mentioned the warm nose in the transition, and some areas picked up some ice. Now, there were only isolated areas that picked up to 1/3 of an inch of ice, and that was out east near Athens and Gainesville. Most of the area picked only about 1/10 of an inch of ice. And that did lead to some icy roadways, some downed trees, and of course, some weighted power lines with the weight of that ice on there. And unfortunately, all of that culminated at the peak of the storm with nearly 100,000 folks without power across North Georgia. Now, later that month, another Arctic air mass settled over the United States. Another area of low pressure developed along the Gulf Coast, but it was a little bit further south, which meant that the epicenter of the wintry precip was further south. And that was around January 22nd, where we saw roughly about up to an inch of snow falling across parts of the metro, with the heaviest totals further to the south. And whenever you go even further south, you see some very impressive snowfall totals. And I can say this, being from this area, Lafayette, Louisiana, picking up 10.5 inches of snow never has happened in my lifetime. So this is something that is very atypical. 9.5 inches of snow in New Orleans, over 7.5 inches in Pensacola, Florida. Folks in Panama City, Valdosta, Georgia, getting significant snowfalls. It was very, very impressive. This secondary event was mainly snow, but with winter weather, you never know if you're going to get snow, if you're going to get cold rain, if you're going to get freezing rain, or if you're going to get sleet. And First Alert meteorologist Isaac Williams will break down those different types of wintry precip and what it takes to get them.
Winter precipitation can come in all forms across North Georgia and Metro Atlanta. Of course, the two harder ones to forecast sometimes are freezing rain and sleet, because snow and just plain old cold rain, pretty straightforward. Rain, of course, starts as snow up in the atmosphere, and then with a large layer of warm air completely melts the snowflake into a raindrop, and sometimes it can be a miserable 33 degrees in a cold rain. Of course, with snow, though, it starts as a snowflake, and then the temperature is below freezing all the way down to the Earth's surface. The snow never has a chance to melt, and we can see the net result of several inches of snow sometimes. But in the middle, freezing rain and sleet are harder. I'll talk about freezing rain coming up in a second. Sleet is where there is just a thin layer of warm air that melts the snowflake, but then there's enough cold air right above the surface to refreeze that into an ice pellet, which turns into sleet, and that can complicate snow forecasts. It can cut into snow totals. Freezing rain, though, is entirely different, and it requires what we call a wedge setup, which is very common in North Georgia in the winter months. We get basically cold air that gets wedged underneath this layer of warmer air, and so when we get freezing rain, you can see that warmer layer of air is much thicker and larger, and basically it allows that snowflake to completely melt, but there's just enough cold air near the surface for that raindrop to basically freeze on contact. This is not the same thing as sleet. Sleet refreezes before it hits the Earth's surface, and it's an ice pellet. This becomes ice, freezing rain does, on the Earth's surface. Again, you can see the rain and the snow still on either side. It's that middle two that's always the most problematic. Here's a bigger view here of freezing rain. So we have the snowflake falling. We have a large layer of warm air that's above freezing that melts that snowflake into a raindrop, and then that thin layer of ice. And what gets super dicey is when the temperature might be 25 to 28 degrees. That's when the most crippling ice storms develop. When we see temperatures closer to freezing, freezing is actually a self-limiting process, so we don't see as much crippling style ice storms when the temperature is near freezing. But if that number gets into the 20s, that's when big problems occur. And we've had several of those in Metro Atlanta. The last significant one was January 22nd and 23rd of 2000, and another one right before Super Bowl 34, also the same year, just a week later. Before this, we had a significant ice storm back in 1973. So it seems the return interval for major ice storms averages about 25 years. And of course, as we move into the winter weather season, we'll keep you posted here on Atlanta News First and inside the First Alert weather app.
Winter weather alerts come in many different forms. Coming up, we'll explain what each alert means and why they're issued. And the peak of our severe weather season is usually in the spring, but we do see an uptick in the winter. We'll explain.
We are working our way closer and closer to the very first day of winter on December 21st, and so it is a great reminder to talk about winter weather, cold weather alerts that the National Weather Service could potentially issue, what they are, the differences, and kind of just all the details that go into these alerts that they issue. The very first one that we're going to talk about here is a winter storm watch. This is outlined when conditions are really favorable over the next couple of days, usually about 2 days ahead of time, where we could be looking at a wintry type system with, this is the key part, has to meet one of these criteria: at least 2 inches of snow, at least a ½ inch of sleet or greater, and then also a ¼ inch of ice. If it meets any one of those conditions, they may be primed to issue a winter storm watch. We also look at the winter storm warning. That's when we get closer to the event, about a day prior, just to kind of put a heads up out there that a wintry type system is on the way. It still has to meet one of those 3 criteria, but this is saying it's happening. We are seeing a winter system coming through, and they're kind of giving that warning that that is something that we need to prepare for with that winter storm warning. So those are the 2 that we watch for with that. Again, has to meet one of those criteria. If it's not quite to that criteria, let's say we're expecting 1 inch of snow, where it's not to the 2 inches of a winter storm warning, they may go ahead and issue a winter weather advisory, and that's usually issued about a day in advance. Again, that's if it's just not quite meeting that winter storm warning criteria. That is for the precipitation types. Let's talk about the cold. We see this every so often in the winter, and the winter in general gets pretty cold for us. Look at where we see those color contours there in the light blue. That is saying if we are expecting a wind chill or an actual air temperature of 10 degrees or below, they will issue a cold weather advisory there, where you see those areas outlined in the blue. And then it gets a little bit colder for that criteria the farther north you go, with the mountains usually looking at that colder weather. If we are expecting, let's say, a wind chill or an actual air temperature of 0, they will issue an extreme cold alert everywhere you see in that dark blue. Very important to remember here as we go into the winter season. Those are our winter weather alerts, and we will be tracking it very closely in the First Alert Weather Department. I'm First Alert meteorologist Anthony Baglione.
These are images that we see way too often in North Georgia, storm damage, whether they come from tornadoes, severe thunderstorm damage, from wind, or even flooding. It's something that can happen any time of the year in North Georgia. I want to show you the tornadoes that we see by month in the entire state of Georgia. And as you already know, those numbers really peak in the spring months of March, April, and May. Of course, those numbers start to go down in the summer to less than 100 per month for the most part. But did you know those tornado numbers, again, for the entire state of Georgia, they start to go back up as we head into fall, November, December, even in January and February, more than 100 per month. This is for the entire state. The reason why we have sort of an extra severe weather season in the fall is because our setup is the same in the fall as it is in the spring. And it's really straightforward. You get these big time cold fronts that start moving in the fall. So that's cold air that clashes with warm air that's still sort of left over from the summer. And it's when that warm air and cold air clash, that's when you really start to get those big time thunderstorms that start redeveloping. In addition to that, when we go from the fall to the wintertime and it starts to cool off, the jet stream gets stronger. That's the wind that's blowing about 30,000 feet off the ground. When you have a really strong jet stream, that can help to create spin in the atmosphere, which is why those tornado numbers start to go back up in the fall. So again, severe weather can happen any time of the year, peaking in the spring, but there's also a bit of a second severe weather season in the fall. And anytime there's severe weather in North Georgia, don't forget that you can track it. We'll keep you up to date in the First Alert Weather app.
We've been telling you all about winter weather, so what are we forecasting for this winter? Our full winter outlook, the forecast, what you can expect this year, that is coming up right after the break. Welcome back. Winter weather always impacts the roadways, and many of us have little experience driving with slick or icy roads. First Alert traffic expert Taylor Tucker gives us a look at what we need to know for safely navigating the roads during winter weather.
As we brace for winter weather, one thing you should know is how the winter weather impacts the roadways. Weather, roadways, they kind of go hand in hand. Let's talk about it. The first thing here, GDOT will always treat the roads prior to the winter event. They typically do that with salt and brine on all your major interstates and highways. They even pick up extra shifts to make sure those roads are treated. Another thing here, icy patches, you should be aware of them on your bridges and shaded areas. Elevated areas are quicker to get slicker, which could be quite tricky for you as you're hitting the roadways. Now, you should note black ice is often so thin that it's invisible. You'll think a road is clear, and that's not the case. So be on the lookout for that. If you're traveling in black ice, here's your big three. Number one, slow it down if you can. 2, avoid hard brake turns. And if you can, check those tires before you hit the roadways. But the biggest key here, avoid the roadways if you can. That's always the safest option. We'll give you the all clear when those roads are clear right here on Atlanta News First. For Atlanta News First, I'm your traffic tracker, Taylor Tucker.
It is that time for the First Alert Weather Team's winter weather outlook. We are expecting a frigid start to winter with the polar vortex impacting our weather as we head into December. We talk about this polar vortex often. We are seeing what we call stratospheric warming up in the Arctic. As a result, that is going to create some disturbances in the jet stream, and that cold air that's normally trapped in the Arctic, we'll start to see the possibility of that frigid air making its way possibly as far south as the southeastern United States. Well, with a strong jet stream, we do see large pressure differences. That keeps the jet stream straighter and that cold air trapped north. But when we get that stratospheric warming, it creates these dips in the jet stream. When that happens, that cold air surges south, and we are expecting that to happen as we head through the month of December. Because of that, in December, we are expecting sudden, intense cold blasts, at least one, possibly more than one. We could see record cold possible during the month of December. Remember, last year, we had those cold blasts in January, so we are expecting to see them sooner in the season. As far as how cold it's going to get and how long it will last, that is still something we will continue to forecast and determine. We will be watching for how far south that cold air gets. Will it reach Florida? Will it stay just north of our area? But right now, thinking is we are going to see that intense cold over our area because it is a La Nina year. And First Alert meteorologist JD DeSharoon talked about that. First Alert meteorologist Ella Dorsey about past winters that were influenced by La Nina. Overall, it typically means we'll be warmer and drier across the southeast. With that said, we are forecasting some intense cold blasts. As those blasts of cold air move in, they will bring the possibility of severe weather. So we could see more severe weather as we head into early 2026. It also means we're going to see those sharp temperature drops. And because we'll see those higher rain chances possible and those big blasts of cold air, it is likely we will see at least one snow event this year. We'll be watching and, of course, keeping you updated if we do expect any winter weather throughout the entire year, not only on Atlanta News First, but on our First Alert weather app. Thank you so much for joining us for our winter weather special. I hope you stay warm and enjoy the rest of the season.